Hi and welcome back to the Sword Study Series. I'm Nick Thomas at the Academy of Historical Fencing, and today I'm going to be looking at a very nice British Mameluke sword. So the Mameluke swords, they became popular realistically after the Egyptian campaign in 1798 to 1801. I've talked about this a number of times, that there were certain influences from that campaign that affected blades and guards and pommel backstrap sections to some degree as well. And the place that it affected the most was actually in general swords, and to the level that even both Wellington and Napoleon both ended up wearing Mameluke styled swords in time, and they became really popular with a certain number of officers, and typically very high ranking officers. So usually general staff, generals and high ranking cavalry officers and that kind of thing, to the level that in 1831 the British Army accepted the Shamshir as the official general's pattern sword, and it still is that sword today. So if you see a general in full uniform today, you will see them wearing a sword very much of this form. But this one isn't of the 1831 pattern. It's the same kind of sword. It's the same British-made Mameluke style sword, but it's not the pattern example, which would suggest it's either pre-pattern or just not made to pattern. And based on the markings on this blade, I would say it's likely that this one belonged to an officer in the Lancers, which lances weren't used by the British in the Napoleonic period. They were adopted just after. So famously, other armies did use lancers. You know, for example, the Polish troops under Napoleon's army famously used lancers. He had the Uhlans using their lancers. And this is therefore probably a British Lancers officer's sword from, I would have to look into the markings, and again, this is a friend's sword, part of that collection that I don't have time to research, I don't have time to go into it. I'm going to give you the video. Maybe when he does some more research on it, I will add some extra info into the description. But at a guess, I would say this is probably from about the 1820s to 1830s. Now, let's just stop there and look at the scabbard for a moment. I've taken it out of the scabbard because the scabbard is a little bit fragile and I don't want to keep putting it in and out all the time. But you'll notice that it has some rather elaborate and beautiful fittings. Leather with brass or copper fittings. Going back to the sword, you notice it has its original sword knot, although it's not in amazing shape, but it's still there, which is unusual. And the thing that marks this sword out, that immediately when I saw it, I thought that's really cool because it's unusual, is it looks like a Shamshir blade, but it's diamond sectioned. And that's quite unusual. So you can see the central spine running along the blade, as you might expect from, say, a rapier. And yeah, it's kind of goes to sort of double-edged diamond section blade, which is just really quite funky. So let's have a look at some specification. Again, hard to balance some of these swords to actually weigh them. It weighs 600. Let's put the sword knot on there as well. The sword knot adds a little bit. 686 with the sword knot. So it's fairly lightweight. For a Shamshir type, it's not hugely curved either. The blade length is 74 centimeters. The balance, as ever, hard to bloody measure on these. Balance is 12.5 centimeters. Profile taper, well, it actually has some by the looks, a reasonable amount. Okay, it's 3 centimeters at the shoulder, down to 2.52, and in the last sort of 15 centimeters, 2.1. Now the distal taper, kind of hard to really get in with the tool that I've got. I can't quite get all the way, but I'd have to estimate it to around about 7 millimeters, going down to 3.6, down to 2.8 in the last 15 centimeters. And the curvature, which as I said is not as extreme as you might expect on some of these swords, is 6.2 centimeters. So there you have it. These Mameluke swords in British service they were realistically, they were dress swords. They were swords for fashion. It doesn't mean that some of them didn't actually see some use at certain times, but very much they were intended for fashion and dress wear. And the Mameluke fashion swords were considered the real height of fashion for that time, really favoured by some British and French officers, particularly within the cavalry. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please do subscribe if you haven't already.